Welcome to Zero Knowledge. I'm your host, Anna Rose. In this podcast, we will be exploring the latest in zero-knowledge research and the decentralized web, as well as new paradigms that promise to change the way we interact and transact online. This week, Tarun and I talk with Martin Köppelmann, CEO of Gnosis. We start off talking about prediction markets, where the project actually started from, and how as a project they've moved away from that. We then cover the new CowSwap DEX, the success of the Gnosis Safe, its use as the foundation of a new generation of DAOs, and SafeSnap, a way to automatically execute governance proposals on Snapshot in DeFi governance. Now, before we start in, I just want to share a message to all the folks listening who might be thinking of jumping into the space. If you're looking for new opportunities to work at top ZK-focused companies, we have now a jobs board on the website. I'm adding a link to this in the show notes. It's a simple list of current open positions at some of the best companies in the space. And if you do apply, please mention that you found out about it through us. I also want to thank this week's sponsor, Least Authority. Least Authority, a leader in the security of distributed systems, has created PrivateStorage, which is a private, secure, and end-to-end encrypted storage solution. Privacy is at the core of Least Authority's work, and PrivateStorage was created using privacy and security by design principles, and includes features like end-to-end encryption, zero-knowledge access passes, and accountless authorization. This ensures users have greater autonomy and assurance that their data is protected. PrivateStorage cannot see user data when it's being stored on their grid. It's built on a commitment to transparency and open source technology by the Least Authority team. By using technology that is publicly reviewable, they allow the users to know exactly what happens to their data. Visit private.storage and register to be notified once the service has launched. This is a one-time notification email and not a mailing list, so the addresses will be deleted after the notification email is distributed. So thank you once again, Least Authority, for supporting the show. Now here is our interview with Martin. So today, Tarun and I are talking with Martin Köppelmann, the CEO of Gnosis. Welcome to the show, Martin.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for having me.
Now, we have already had Frederica, your business partner and partner, on the show in the past, and she gave a rundown of like the origin story of Gnosis, how you guys got started, and what had happened up to that point. But that episode was like 2 years ago. So I'm very curious to hear, like, what's new with Gnosis? What have you been up to since then?
Yeah, a bunch of things. So yeah, I think we really morphed into this broader Ethereum infrastructure company. So we started focusing on prediction market, but started just so early within Ethereum that a lot of pieces that were required to build things were missing. And that's why we essentially moved one layer down the stack and built infrastructure like wallet, like the Gnosis Safe, exchanges, modules for DAOs, and various elements.
I think I actually spoke with Frederica about this idea of like Gnosis having so many some very, very used projects, some very, very cutting edge ideas and sort of like pieces of code or like products basically released into the wild. And I had asked her, like, is it a dev shop? Are you like doing lots of things? And at the time she actually said something along the lines of like, our current focus is on focus. And I think it was that idea of like, you expand out with ideas and then you have to like narrow down into like very specific ideas. Would you say right now, are you at a phase where you are like more outward, like trying to experiment a lot, or are you actually focusing in on like a few specific projects?
No, we are definitely focusing on the things that turned out to work. And they are mainly the wallet, the Gnosis Safe, and exchanges, or what we call Gnosis protocol. And yeah, surprisingly, other things that, we initially put a lot of focus on, for example, prediction markets, we to some extent have put to the side currently because we really focus on the things that are simply working.
So what has changed for you on the prediction market front?
Yeah, a handful of things. So, first of all, to build prediction markets, it was always necessary to have some underlying mechanism. So obviously to have a prediction market, you have to have a market. So a DEX was always required. Of course, other projects are and have been building DEXs, or actually the DEX space is insanely competitive. But still, when we started there was no DEX, so we naturally needed to build DEXs. But that being said, we still feel building a prediction market as an application on Ethereum right now is probably not a good idea. Because, well, transaction fees are one aspect. Currently, a simple trade can cost $100 on mainnet, and that already kills a lot of use cases.
Yeah, especially when it's prediction market. It's not even like a trade necessarily. It's a bet.
Yeah, so it's very clear that the size of the bet would need to be, well, quite large to justify a $100 transaction fee, and again, kind of that already kills a lot of use cases. So of course you could move to layer 2, but we decided for now to do more foundational stuff, like again the Gnosis Safe or our work on DEXs on L1.
Tarun, this is a question I'm going to throw to you. What are your thoughts on prediction markets? Did you follow that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably in a similar vein. I really thought they would be the killer application a long time ago, but I think over time it's just proven that they need much more care and love than a lot of other applications. And I think we're just not at the point where that'll happen. But, does this feel like, WebVan in 1999, like that later became, like someone else 20 years later figured out how to do it? For sure.
What is WebVan?
Sorry, so WebVan is like DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever. Way. But this was like in the first .com bubble, and it didn't work. Okay. They literally were the same thing, but they needed the mobile web and cell phones to make it work.
Makes sense.
And so I kind of feel like, to Martin's point, the infrastructure is still just not at the level. And we don't know what the cell phone is for prediction markets, but it's clear there's something that's like that. I don't think anyone can tell you exactly what the thing that's missing is, because there's just so many things that need to get built. But yeah, I kind of feel similarly, although I think these like semi-centralized alternatives, which might have legal issues over time, will be a crutch until we build in good enough infrastructure.
Is that the general feeling in that kind of part of the ecosystem? Like, because there was other prediction market projects out there. Have a lot of them moved away from those original models?
Yeah, I would say they are still kind of, always new players coming and trying, and that's obviously a good thing. But I have also become more skeptical about other aspects. Yeah, prediction markets are one big problem or challenge, at least, is the zero-sum nature. With the token system, kind of you have this, non-zero-sum games where everyone goes into a token, everyone gets rich, ideally value is created and so on. With prediction markets, fundamentally, you have markets that are zero-sum markets where someone needs to lose, and the question is who is losing. Yeah. The promise was always, you have information and you kind of use this information and you make money, but you can only make money if someone else is losing. And there are some answers to that, and kind of, you have political betting where it's quite clear. And we saw in the last election that there was probably a decent amount of irrationality involved, which is in a way good for prediction markets because it answers the question who's losing. It gives, in a way, it funds those who, potentially provides valuable information. But in other markets, when you ask when will ETH2 launch, then the question is who will be losing, who's the fish to finance the kind of revealing this useful information. And then some answers might be, or like what people tried, is someone is willing to pay for this information, but that's not easy. So I mean, who's paying $100,000 to get this information when then it's public? So yeah, those are just a few thoughts.
That's interesting. Did you feel like in that election example, I felt like that was one of the times where I saw the topic come up again in a big way, I think people tweeting like, look, they're predicting it correct while the results were still being counted, even though, kind of predicted in a wonky way at the time. It was also swinging wildly back and forth depending on like what a newscast had said. But yeah, what did you make of that experience, like watching that in action? Was it sort of promising for the concept in the future? Like maybe once the tooling is there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say it definitely was a moment where where actually some market activity happened. Well, and definitely the surprising thing was how long after even the election happened, well, the odds for kind of Trump still being elected or still whatever winning were at a surprising 10, 15, sometimes even up to 20%. And I think to some extent that can be explained by inefficiencies of the market setup. So you would need to lock your capital, specifically if a market is denominated in stablecoin, then you might get, best case, you might get a payout of 20% in a time frame of a few months, when at the same time DeFi craziness is happening and you can kind of get 50% yield without any risk. Why would you take the 20% with risk? Yeah.
An interesting fact that at least just, and this is purely anecdotally, is that people I know who were professional sort of like sports gamblers who are, in some ways the ideal customer for a prediction market, most of them just trade crypto now instead of sports betting.
Right.
Whoa.
Yeah.
like when the market dies, when the bull market dies and we go back to a bear market, I'm sure they'll go back to sports betting. But a lot of sports bettors, especially in the pandemic, just kind of were like, well, I need to find a new thing. and I think that prediction markets, unfortunately, have sort of the return structure of sports betting and less of the return structure of like these bull and bear cycles in crypto. So.
Yeah. I would also, I mean, say same thing. So in a specifically in a bull market, when opportunity is so large everywhere else, then sports betting or prediction markets are actually quite a tight business, and you might extract a few percent on something if you do it well. But
with a lot of work.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of work, and it's not that appealing if there are other opportunities, better opportunities.
So I think most of this interview, we're actually going to be talking about some kind of newer ideas that have come out of the Gnosis team, CowSwap, SafeSnap. But before we do that, I actually wanted to throw back to an episode we did pretty recently where Tarun had mentioned that you potentially were at least part of the group that came up with the initial AMM model. And since we have you on the show, I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about like, what was that? Like what time frame are we talking, and how were these ideas first developing?
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, for prediction markets to work, you need to have markets. So we actually started to work on prediction markets and therefore for markets even before Ethereum launched. We wanted to be ready at launch, and actually, 2 weeks after Ethereum launch, we had first market running with back then 1,000 Ether in funding. That wasn't a lot of money back then, but anyhow, and from very early on, we used in the prediction market world automated market maker. And in the prediction market world, the market maker that's quite famous is this LMSR market maker invented by Robin Hanson. So we were coming from that world, or that was kind of the standard for prediction markets back then. And then there was this movement, and we're talking about 2015, 2016, to say, okay, well, we might use automated market makers also outside of prediction markets. And I think, there are many people involved in kind of very open exchange of ideas. I mean, I think that's really one of the core things that makes Ethereum so great, in my view, this open marketplace of ideas, sharing ideas all over the place. So discussion happened on Reddit and on forums, and really different people were involved. But at some point, we wrote a blog post describing how to build a DEX on Ethereum. That was early 2017, and there we concretely proposed this formula, this simple XY equals K formula, that then became very famous through Uniswap.
But at that time, did you realize kind of what this was, or was it just
sure.
And was it fully developed, or what had to happen since then?
Well, I mean, we had code for this, so we had we implemented it actually, but I think it was probably too early. at those days, there were more urging problems to be solved, and I think in the end, Uniswap definitely did super nice and super clean implementation of that. Definitely also a cleaner and better execution of it, and then rightfully became this famous exchange for this. Yeah.
I have to say, like, it's more amazing to me that kind of these discussions on Reddit posts in 2015, like even before like around the "can you stop trading" incident, I remember there were a lot of Reddit posts between you and Vitalik and a few other people that were really kind of more or less pantomiming, like, hey, like, is there some invariant formulation? We don't need this. We don't need all the properties of an LMSR. It's overkill. And I think it's just kind of interesting how the set of Reddit posts is kind of more powerful than like 20 years of academic research in this stuff, because most people in academia were focused on this concept of high dimensional markets because it's kind of sexier. But in reality, how many people are really trading 1,000 asset portfolios for another 1,000
Right.
asset portfolio? Very few, right? And I think like that was kind of the academics definitely lost. They got caught in kind of like the thing that sounded sexy versus the thing that would be useful. And I thought that this scenario is one of the more interesting stories that I hope society at large one day kind of appreciates. But obviously I think maybe it might be our little world. But I think it's a very cool instance of like everyone kind of like believing the academics version of the world is just like prima facie true or something, and somehow like no, it just turned out that like market forces created something a little bit better, which is cool. I don't know. To me, that somehow the narrative of this is very unique in that way.
Yeah. Although one reason we actually kind of dropped this effort was our probably back at the time overestimation of the problem of MEV, so of minor extractable value. Well, obviously for the last 2 or 3 years that hasn't been a big topic, but now, well, it finally hit reality. And so, yeah, I would say we spent the time, well, already in anticipation of this problem, and hopefully have now solutions that contribute to this problem.
Well, I think that's a great place to kind of dive into how Gnosis is thinking about MEV, both from the stance of an exchange, but also from the stance of things like flashbots. Maybe we can start with the etymology of CowSwap, because I think starting with the name might get us into how that's related to MEV.
Right, exactly. So coming from what we see right now is that if you place your order against a market maker, or basically you're sending your order, your transaction to a miner, miners will extract value from you. So basically you are handing them over a transaction, and they will use that against you. And they very explicitly do that. They are very public about it, that they will, for example, sandwich your transaction. So you send your transaction trying to buy a token. They will, right before this transaction gets into the block, buy the token just before you, move the price up, then let you buy at a higher price. And immediately after your transaction was mined, they will sell it, the token again, and really just extract this profit. And that is, that's a problem, I would say, in multiple dimensions. So of course, first of all, it's not great for the trader, but it is actually, in my view, a deeper problem. It even challenges the concept of decentralization, because what we are seeing now is kind of the next step that to some extent users are starting, or some protocols are starting to defend by, for example, not sending their transactions at all to the public mempool, but instead just doing it privately and kind of having private arrangement with miners, which kind of threatens the concept of censorship resistance and permissionless blockchain. But maybe one step back, what kind of our high level, our attempt or approach is to say, well, instead of sending your transaction to the miner, and who already signaled that they will not treat it well for you as a user, we basically ask users in CowSwap, or in Gnosis protocol, that's the underlying protocol. CowSwap is the product on top of it, to send their transactions as so-called meta transactions, or specific order format. And that cannot directly be used by the miner. So the miner cannot just take this transaction and try to extract value from it, but instead we have this layer in between, which we call the solvers. And the solvers, they try to execute the transactions or the orders on behalf of the user. But the big difference is that they are bonded and they are governed. So the idea is if they need to kind of give this promise that they will execute the orders in some sense of fairness for the user, or in some form of favoring the user's interest. And if they don't do that, they get slashed, or simply the users would stop sending the transactions to them. But high level, the idea is don't give the transaction to the miner, give it to someone who cares about your interest.
But what does that intermediate agent look like? You sort of said it's built on the Gnosis protocol. So is it the Gnosis protocol that's doing that somehow?
Yeah. So, I mean, high level, you can say, as you would broadcast your Ethereum transaction to a network, you can instead broadcast your order to this solver network. And the solvers, they can, like miners, pick up those transactions and try to include them, but they are restricted in some forms. So they cannot do arbitrary stuff. For example, there are some basic guarantees of fairness that we can guarantee through the contract. So, for example, if there are two trades on the same token in the same block on Ethereum today, very likely those two traders would get a different price. In the Gnosis protocol, it's guaranteed by the contract that two trades with trading on the same token in the same block needs to get the same price. So there are some levels, some requirements guaranteed, and then there are additional requirements that are just softly guaranteed. So the idea is, well, let's say there's Uniswap and there's Balancer, and there are different places of liquidity, SushiSwap. Then the soft promise is you should execute it wherever the trader gets the best price. And that is something we cannot fully enforce by the protocol because that would increase gas costs enormously. But that is something we can enforce on the governance layer. So if a solver consistently doesn't act in the best interest of the user, they can get slashed. And that's then would be done by a governance layer.
In this model, is there an AMM, kind of going back to that topic, or is like I'm trying to map what you're saying and then also bring it back to that?
So there is the whole current Ethereum DEX space with Uniswap, with Balancer, with SushiSwap, and kind of all those AMMs. Currently, well, Ethereum trading is dominated by AMMs, but the solver layer is in between the AMM and the mining pools. So yeah, the solvers kind of decide how to ideally execute a bunch of transactions against AMMs. And there is also this where CowSwap comes from. And this idea of cows, coincidence of ones.
Okay.
So let's say you have two traders, one selling token A and the other buying token A. Then if they would execute today their transactions directly on Ethereum, kind of the first transaction would hit the automated market maker, would get a specific price. Then probably some sandwiching would happen, but well, let's put that aside. But then the second transaction would hit the automated market maker and get a different price, and they would both pay fees. In our model, they are kind of executed in a batch, or basically each block is one batch, and we try to execute all trades happening in one block or in one batch at the same time. So those two trades can already be matched against each other, and they will probably not be exactly matchable, so they will probably not exactly have the same size, but so only the remaining part then needs to be traded against the automated market maker. So, well, we save the user already fees from the automated market maker, and we give those fairness guarantees that they get the same price.
Can you say the acronym again for cow? It was
coincidence of wants.
Coincidence of wants. Okay.
Yeah. So two people kind of by coincidence, someone wants to trade in that direction, and someone wants to trade in that direction.
Question about the naming. Did it have anything to do with there being a cow emoji as an avail?
No, for sure. I mean, we in the design, or obviously we play with this cow meme, and people seem to like that.
I think one thing that's important to remember is there has been no decentralized exchange that has been successful without actually being an emoji already. I guess other than Balancer, I don't really know what the emoji is for Balancer.
Well, they could have the balance. Isn't there a balance
Yeah, I
symbol?
think you're right. There is.
I feel like there is.
But like if you think about Uniswap and SushiSwap, like The single emoji
Right.
meme was like one of the driving characteristics of both of those launches.
So in this case, though, CowSwap, you just described it. It sits between the user and the AMM. Is it taking a fee of its own?
Yeah, so it is. And one part is extremely natural because on CowSwap, as a user, you don't pay the Ethereum gas fee. Well, usually if you trade on other market makers, you pay the simple transaction fee. And here you just sign this order that basically gives this solver the allowance to take your tokens and give you other tokens. But eventually the solver will need to execute the transaction and therefore pay the gas fee. So how we do that is that part of the order is a fee that you then can already pay with the token. Well, either you're selling or you want to buy, and that would go to the protocol.
What would you call this? Is this a dApp that lives on top of other dApps?
So we see it to some extent as a MetaDex. Yeah, probably middleware. CowSwap itself, of course, is a product, but ideally will not be the only product. And actually, we are doing this together with Balancer. We are using their new kind of vault contract to help some gas optimizations. To some extent, you can use internal balances or save some gas on ERC20 token transfers if you do this batch settlement and you settle a bunch of trades. But long story short, also the Balancer interface will soon kind of route their trades, or trades coming from that interface should be routed through this Balancer Gnosis protocol, where again then on the middle layer the solvers sit that kind of collect all those orders and try to figure out what's the optimal way to take all this trading volume and distribute it and execute it at fair prices against all the on-chain liquidity, again, coming from Balancer, coming from SushiSwap, Uniswap, and so on.
Interesting. So in this case, what you described is like the benefits to using this. It's reduced MEV and reduced cost. Do you see this project then also kind of coming into competition with the L2s? Like it's not an L2, but like, is it solving a similar problem to what they're solving?
Yeah, it's to some extent. I mean, of course, there can be DEXs completely separate on L2s, but as soon as they want to tap into the L1 liquidity, it can actually be very useful because we have this concept of batch settlements. So we have a list of, 15 trades that might happen on, kind of on a higher level, and then they are just settled in one larger transactions against the L1 on-chain liquidity.
Cool.
Yeah, I guess maybe how did you end up kind of deciding on the Balancer vault and Balancer, working with them versus kind of integrating your existing kind of setup? And then also a little bit about kind of like maybe a slight deviation, but not a super deviation, is talking about Gnosis auction and that version of the world, because I think the dual to kind of the CowSwap is these OTC large size transactions are allowing DAOs to kind of sell their treasuries more efficiently. And I think it's interesting to understand how you thought about building both of those projects at the same time, because one is very left brain, one is very right brain, right? In some weird way.
Right. So maybe first answering the partnership with Balancer. Yeah, I would say those things are perfectly complementary. Balancer is developing in a direction. They are trying to address the problems of automated market makers in a different way. So there's this problem of capital inefficiency, and Uniswap is solving it currently, or trying to solve it with Uniswap version 3 by something, I would say, that brings it closer back to an order book mechanism in a very elegant way. But Balancer is kind of, I would say, going into the direction of still trying to keep this very retail friendliness, so that someone who has not too much idea about market making can still kind of put their capital in there and hopefully get a good return. And the ways how they achieve that and how they improve kind of the market maker experience, or the AMM experience, is dynamic fees, so that someone else is being able to to set the fees for those who provide the liquidity, and this concept of managed pools or pool manager and asset manager, that the assets that sit in the market maker or in the AMM can still be used somewhere else. So I think the bottom line is Uniswap potentially wants to even reduce TVL and say, okay, we can with less TVL still have good amount of trading volume. While Balancer really tries to say, okay, what can we do with as much capital as possible, and how can we use it as good as possible? And therefore, I would say it makes a lot of sense to say, well, we built this layer on top of Balancer, where trading kind of to some extent can already be netted or can already be matched against each other, but then we can match it against this large pool. Although I have to say the protocol is slightly preferring Balancer, or there's slight gas optimizations for Balancer, but it's possible to settle against any on-chain liquidity. So it's not just bound to Balancer.
If we think about the CowSwap, it's really focused on small size traders, right? Because if you're trading large enough size, MEV probably doesn't matter that much to you, to be honest. I mean, it does a little bit,
why?
But it's not.
Why? I mean, why would it matter?
Well, it's not that it doesn't matter. It's just that, like, I feel like people are computing this as percentage of trading size. And, like, there are certainly times, right, in duress where it will be large when you're large size. But when the chain is kind of like in median gas price, it's not.
Yeah, I would to some extent, I mean, from the meme and so on, we definitely targeted with CowSwap in the beginning, like small traders. But I would actually argue, as a small trader, the only thing you should right now care about is gas costs. Because, it's, to some extent, it's insane that sometimes people pay 10% or even more of the traded value in gas costs. Then you really don't have to care about MEV, because there we are talking about maybe at max 1%. So if you're wasting 10%, you don't need to care about 1%. But for large trades, this is 1%. That can be a lot, and there the gas costs then play less of a role. So I would definitely say, and we have seen over kind of $1 million plus trades on CowSwap, and we definitely want to see more of those. So we are still targeting that market.
For sure. I wasn't necessarily saying that that like it's impossible. I guess the notion of what large and small is changed over time too. I was just thinking about Gnosis auction as more an interesting mechanism for DAOs that will have to sell very large size potentially. And so I guess, at least to me, they kind of seem like opposite products servicing the opposite sides of the market. Even though small might not mean your mom buying whatever the new dog coin is. So maybe actually, it would be great if you talked about the Gnosis auction. Like, describe what the genesis is, what it is, how you guys got there.
Right. So Gnosis auction is a fairly straightforward auction protocol where anyone can at any time set up an auction and simply define a bunch of tokens they want to sell. And of course, they need to specify for what they want to sell it. And then over a specified period of time, could be days, could be 15 minutes, bidders can submit their bids at different prices. And once the auction clears, or basically once the time ends, it's actually possible to do on-chain the calculation of this one single clearing price. So you have all the bids, and it will calculate the exact bid that is required to clear, basically to sell all the tokens, and it will be then executed at this price. And the one thing where that became most used is IDOs. So the idea of your completely new project, the token is not yet traded on the market, on any market, and you kind of want to have an initial price finding mechanism, or trading mechanism for the token, and then this auction mechanism is a straightforward way to do it, and combats a lot of the problems, or the MEV problem gets much worse if you're still in price finding mode. So if the price might within minutes go up by 10 or 5x from a starting price, well, then the MEV problem on automated market makers is really getting severe. So that is Gnosis auction, and it can definitely also be used for larger trades in general. So we have seen this use case more and more, that DAOs sit on $1 million treasuries, and as a DAO, they want to sell, let's say, 1 million worth of, or 5 million worth of Ether, let's say, for a stable coin. And it's not so easy for them to do that. So, of course, they could try to trade on, well, let's say Uniswap, but that would first cause more slippage than necessary. And also, again, you have this problem of MEV. And specifically, you have the problem that you need to initiate the trade probably with a long, there needs to be a proposal, and then there needs to be voting, and eventually the transaction is executed. So at the time you initiate it, you don't know what the price will be. So it's hard to do it. So yeah, here Gnosis auction has become an option. And the way we are thinking about it in kind of relationship to Gnosis protocol is that eventually we are going to merge those things. So how that would look like is that you can optionally have this auction and have the bidding going on, but the final clearing, or once the time is over, then you still have the solver that will do the remaining settlement against on-chain liquidity. And it's required to serve all the bids first, but if there's something remaining, or kind of there's a better price right now on chain available than kind of some of the bids, it can use this settlement against on-chain liquidity.
So are those two things being used in tandem, or is it more theoretically they could be used?
So right now they are still separate, yeah.
Okay. So this is like an idea then.
Yeah. Well, I think a natural transition is basically talking about how, like, hey, we've seen some DAOs use Gnosis auction, and how does kind of that interact with kind of a lot of the governance tools you guys are working on. I think especially in the vacuum left by Aragon, it seems like there's a 2-horse race of very different philosophies of compound governance, forks, and Gnosis. And so, yeah, it'd be interesting to think about how, you guys have this suite of products that in theory actually could all be tied together. So, where do you see that going? And also, how do you guys think through governance?
Right. So the background of our kind of governance activities was the very simple fact that we developed Gnosis Safe coming back from our own needs. So really kind of long time ago, we did an ICO, and back in the days, there wasn't even a multisig available that could hold tokens. So, we developed one, and it became the kind of standard for teams to manage funds, and kind of out of that effort, the Gnosis Safe developed. The Gnosis Safe is simple smart contract or multisig wallet that allows you to set permissions of kind of who can access the funds under which rules. The simplest rules are simple, let's say 2 out of n out of m signatures that are required to move the funds, but you can set more and more complex rules, kind of say under this conditions, or some out of this group and some out of this group, and whatever. You can really try to define rules for who's allowed to do when what transaction. And what we have seen is that more and more teams or /DAOs are using it, or that became basically the standard solution for teams to manage the funds. They put them in a safe. And the step we then have been doing, or the second product that emerged, was this idea of snapshot voting or off-chain voting. So on-chain voting is simply very complicated and, frankly, very expensive. So an Ethereum transaction can easily cost $50, $100. And I mean, who would want to pay $100 just to submit a vote? And I mean, even if let's say you are just one out of 10,000 token holders, I mean, you would certainly not pay $100 to kind of for your small vote. So what became really the standard was this concept of off-chain voting, that you just sign a message with your wallet that contains a token, and you can verify that, you have the token and so on. But that, unfortunately, is all off-chain and cannot be easily verified on-chain. So that's the bridge we were trying to build with SafeSnap.
So you just mentioned snapshot. Let's define what snapshot is, and then how that relates to SafeSnap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so Snapshot is this governance tool that allows very easy for communities to say, okay, we have a token, and you can within minutes spin up a simple voting system where someone can make, anyone can make a proposal and the token holders vote. But all of that is done off-chain, but it it provides tools to read the balances on chain, and that's also where the name snapshot comes from. So you define a specific block where a snapshot is taken. So on this block, you say, okay, we had 5,000 token holders, and token holder 1 had this balance, and token holder 2 had this balance, and kind of those are your voting rights, and kind of all of that logic. That's what snapshot provides.
Who put that together? Is that a product that you built, or is that someone else's?
No, that is something that came out of Balancer. So Balancer used that for their own governance, but at some point decided, okay, this is a useful tool in general, and then kind of the teams, a specific team spun out and is in general providing this tooling. And I think currently, definitely the majority of DAOs, probably a few hundred. I mean, maybe active, maybe like 50, but it's heavily used, by many DAOs.
This is still off-chain voting, though. So this is you say it's a snapshot that gives you the value of, I guess, each user's voting rights. But then where are they actually voting? Are they just like, if it's not on chain, how can you not, like, couldn't you just sort of fake it?
Yes and no. So when you vote, what you're doing is you are actually using your account to provide a signature, and therefore that is not fakeable. So that can be verified. There are problems around censorship, so it's not clear that, or you need to trust kind of their server that your vote is actually, or they could censor votes basically. Yeah.
I see. So is that a bit of like a weak point of Snapshot?
Oh, for sure. And that's definitely something they want to address. There are various solutions to that. The easiest one is to take your favorite sidechain or L2 or whatever and publish the votes there. Yeah.
So let's move on to SafeSnap. This is the project that interacts. Is this also something that lives on top of Snapshot?
Exactly. So previously the status was very often, or kind of it's a very, very common setup for DAOs, effectively have this snapshot voting where decisions are made, but then still just have a multisig. So I don't know, 5 members from the community effectively control the funds and control sometimes even just kind of rights in the protocol. So rights to upgrade, rights to set fees, right to make changes. So the idea is, well, the voting is happening, and then you hope that the multisig holders, or they promise that they will do what the voting says. Of course, that's not necessarily what we want, or kind of course, ideally we would want to make the voting directly enforceable. And that is what SafeSnap tries to do. So what we are saying is, okay, you have your safe anyhow that kind of has this right, or well, that might have the funds or might have the right to do some change. And we built this tool that really tries to connect those two things tightly. So the first thing that is required is that when you write a proposal, you not just write a text saying, well, we should set the fee to something, but in addition, you need to provide actual bytecode or a specific Ethereum transaction. So you say that's a proposal, and basically that is what we want to see. And this transaction could be, well, changing a fee parameter, that could be making a payout out of the treasury to someone, that could, whatever. It can be anything. It can be setting an ENS record to another content hash. So that's the first step. To kind of be more specific, to be machine readable, kind of make a machine readable proposal. The second step is, after the voting has happened, then you somehow need to have a mechanism to decide, or to let the Ethereum blockchain know that this voting kind of, was it successful, or kind of. And there we are using an Oracle solution, and that's another project we are building on top, which is called RealityEase. And the very simple concept here is that it is a staking game. So someone is making the claim saying kind of, well, that vote happened, and it happened in favor of the proposal. The proposal was accepted, and this vote had this specific payload. And you're basically making this claim, and you're staking a small amount of, let's say, Ether behind it. Let's say half an Ether. And if no one challenges that, fine. Then after a timeout period of, let's say, 24 hours, it passes and the proposal can be executed. If someone is challenging it, then it has this escalation game where you need to double the amount, and you could kind of challenge against it. And then again, if it runs out of time, 24 hours, well, then it's rejected. And actually the one who first did the potentially malicious claim, they will lose their Ether. And you kind of have the staking game. There are a few parameters how you can set up the staking game. One is just using Ether, and kind of relying on the idea that the majority of Ether holders might be honest. If you don't want to do that, you can also use the token for the staking game. And then you kind of basically say, well, we anyhow assume that the majority of token holders can do whatever they want. So then we can also use that security in the staking game.
I see now where the link is to DAOs, how it provides a structure to execute sort of those choices that are made. Whereas I kind of want to go back to Snapshot. If it's happening off chain, is it just sort of like after the vote would happen, a new smart contract would be deployed to do it, or that like something would be triggered in a smart contract by some central entity? Like I'm trying to figure out this comparison a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, so usually the idea is that there is already a safe or already a contract that holds, let's say, whatever the DAO represents, so that contract can have some power in other contracts or hold some assets. So that is an also safe, and that already exists. And then the proposal is just a transaction that is being executed from that safe.
But going back to what it was without SafeSnap, that's what I'm trying to compare. Like,
it was exactly the same in that sense. The only difference was without SafeSnap, you just had to rely on the safe owners, on the kind of like the 3 out of 4 signers to actually do this proposal. With SafeSnap, you don't need to have those 3-4 authorities. Actually, there's a middle ground that we even currently recommend. The middle ground would be to still have those signers as a backstop. So it can be executed completely automatically through the SafeSnap mechanism, but they could still have some veto rights. But eventually you can get rid of them. And then you have the safe that doesn't have any owners, or the only owners is this complicated governance mechanism with the Oracle that kind of says, well, that was voted on.
But the SafeSnap does not help in the creation of the governance proposals in any way, does it?
Right. No, exactly. So the whole process of how you create the proposal, to some extent, we have a small plugin that allows you to define an Ethereum transaction, so a target and a payload. Okay, but the whole process of how you make the proposal and how you come to agreement about the proposal, that is in principle agnostic. So, we have built it around the snapshot tool, but actually it's already being used for other mechanisms. So there are, for example, DAOs on XDAI, let's say, Colony, and other frameworks. So you could also say, well, the decision is happening there through that framework or whatever rules you want to have, but eventually it's executed the same way through this Oracle mechanism that then would not ask, did the snapshot vote happen, but did this DAO decision happen on XDAI or on Polygon or wherever? And it's basically just a way to execute this decision that was somewhere objectively made somewhere else.
When I first read about this, I thought for a moment it was related to what Gauntlet is building, what Tarun is working on with the kind of coming up with these governance proposals. But Tarun, to you, like for your tool, does it have to be on-chain governance to be able to do it? Or are you also helping to like determine proposals for off-chain or for something like Snapshot?
So actually, I mean, we kind of definitely work with protocols that are using things like Snapshot for adjusting parameters. I think the interesting thing that we're starting to see is really that there's this kind of like fast path and slow path in governance of like really big changes will take a whole vote, like a full like executing the bytecode vote. And then really small changes might not, like up to some bounds, be allowed to be voted on by like a smaller subset or like a subgroup of people. But yeah, I basically think that either way, regardless of whether you do kind of slow governance or fast governance, there's still kind of this sense in which you both need some sense of what recommendations look like. as well as like a way for people to really kind of have tools for generating proposals. Because at the end of the day, right, like one of the reasons SafeSnap has a huge advantage over, say, Compound governance from a UX standpoint, it's just way easier to make a proposal, right? Like the propose function in Compound actually really does require you to understand what bytecode you're sending, like quite intimately. Whereas I do think in kind of the snapshot type of thing, you can deal with slightly more qualitative votes.
Yeah, I mean that's an ongoing discussion for well, the safe in general. Even if in a simple multisig, if you want to do more complex or many DeFi interactions, for example, require like 3-4 transactions, and if you do that with your hardware wallet, that's not too bad. But if that always requires kind of a round of, well, people in different time zones and kind of they need to sign, that gets complicated. So you want to have a way to bundle or to kind of have something that's meaningful on a human understandable kind of on a proposal level and not on a bytecode level, and try to define that fairly easy. And one thing we are working on for the safe is that you will just be able to simulate transactions or kind of use normal dApps in a simulated environment and kind of say, I want to do this and then I want to do that. And basically then all those transactions are recorded, and out of those proposal or the bytecode to execute all those steps is created. Yeah.
You kind of mentioned a few projects that are using Snapshot, and then some are not using it, and they're doing more like this on-chain. Although I guess it's on-chain on their own dApp chain. I'm trying to picture what like the alternative is to some of those examples, and maybe you can give actual project examples, because I'm not as familiar with the landscape of DeFi DAOs as both of you are.
No, I mean, for example, there's the Compound governance framework. So there are, and also Maker. So there are some governance frameworks where voting and the execution is happening on chain. First of all, it's great because that really is the ultimate level of guarantees or decentralization. But of course, it comes at very, very high costs. So the participation, just the voting, again, can easily cost $50 to $100. And that's why more and more projects are using at least hybrid approaches or this complete off-chain voting.
Got it. So where is SafeSnap at? Is this already rolled out? Yeah, where at what stage is it?
Right. So it is rolled out, and we have a few DAOs using it. It's still clearly in the space where it's somewhat still complicated to use, as Tarun hinted at, kind of creating this bytecode for the proposal. Right now, the tooling is not as good that it would be easy for everyone to create a proposal. So that is definitely the most pressing thing that needs to be improved.
I guess I think the interesting thing that we've learned is, 2017 had this whole meme, well, maybe not totally just a meme, but it happened of like, hey, do tons of on-chain governance, maybe do futarchy, maybe, there's kind of this like pie, and futarchy would basically be prediction market on governance votes. And we kind of had this like very like amorphous kind of like, hey, here's some idea, but here's no technical spec for it or implementation details. So that's an exercise to the reader. And, 3 or 4 years later, we're like, we actually have, instead of having kind of, hey, there's a one size fits all Slayer governance model, we actually have this like hierarchical model of like different fits for different types of needs. And I think that's inevitably we're going to have this like hydra of different options for different people. But I think it's kind of cool that we've evolved from trying to like have this like theory of everything for governance to like, hey, well, maybe just use the right tool for your current scenario. And I think DeFi kind of forced that into this space. I think like layer ones are inherently conservative and like won't do big changes. And I think to some extent that's why things like governance in like Tezos, right, has had extremely few changes. It's extremely hard to correctly do. B, it's hard to convince anyone to even vote because there's a high fraction of non-active asset holders. And C, it's like there are day-to-day changes you do want to make frequently. And I think only in DeFi is there clear monetary incentive to changing things. where people are willing to go and like build kind of this infrastructure. And I, at least that's, I think it's interesting to see like compound governance and sort of the safe snap version of the world as like two kind of non-competing things, because they both serve a very clear purpose for different use cases. And I think that's the thing I'm always left struck by in non-Ethereum layer ones, is that like somehow there's just too many things left to governance, and it just is really hard to do. Like, I don't know. I mean, Anna, you've dealt with a lot of these like hard forks in other layer ones. Like, think about how hard it is.
Have I dealt with the hard forks?
Or well, I mean,
actually,
also trusted
the
ceremonies, upgrades. Sorry,
yes. Yeah, actually, I mean, I recently with the zero knowledge validator, we went for a hub proposal on the Cosmos hub, and it was fascinating. That's on-chain governance. It's voting by the people and validators. It was amazing because this is a proposal for events. We're doing 4 events with the ZKV on the Cosmos ecosystem, and to try to explain what an event costs to every single voter there was very challenging. And maybe that says something about like marketing costs not going through a hub or like a funding like that. But yes, I think my experience so far with on-chain governance is the systems aren't quite in place to make that efficient and to make most efficient use of those funds, because not everyone who's voting has domain expertise. And I think that's maybe where DeFi wins, because it's a very narrow level of expertise needed in order to do that type of governance, right? Like, you're not talking about funding the marketing. You're not talking about like the larger funding vision. You're talking about one very narrow thing where there can be a lot of people with that expertise.
But even in DeFi, so probably the most complex safe whatever setup is from the Yearn team. Already there, they are working on a setup with 7 different kind of safes basically that would have different authorities about different things. So already there you then have this separation of, if it's a proposal concerning funding external efforts, it would go through different pipelines. Yeah.
I think the main thing to understand is that, to your point, very scoped, easy to understand, and like scoped in terms of both the actual thing that's being voted on and the framework to understand why anyone should care is very important to governance. And I think that's where the like layer one, like, hey, we're going to like upgrade the whole network and force everyone to change all their node code. And yeah, we want to do it next week. Attitude is like very hard to reconcile versus like, hey, we want to change the interest rate. Here's why like the current thing is wrong, is much more palatable. And I think it's kind of interesting to see that, you know, in 2017, we had like all these people being like, Ethereum governance sucks, which on the all core dev side, you could argue it does, but it's kind of interesting to see like the flippening of, the actual governance innovation seems to be in ETH land versus off ETH, which is like, you know, if you were in 2017, you would have been like saying the opposite thing if you watched ICOs, right? Like it was like everyone was like, we're going to build better governance into our thing. And I don't think there's a good example outside of DeFi of like governance actually being kind of effective in a decentralized manner, which is funny, right? Like it's just hard to have predicted that 4 years ago. You know, when Gnosis ICO'd, it was a different universe, right? Like everyone was just like huge vision, but like no technical details. And, you know, 4 years later, we're like, oh, okay, these are the things that work and these are things that don't. And it's cool to see that. You know, it's not necessarily one size fits all, but we found a nice equilibrium.
The Pleaser DAO that we talked about 2 episodes ago, is that using any of these things, by the way?
We're actually using compound governance for the token. I'm officially, as a US citizen, not on the multi-sig. I just happened to accidentally own some of the initial minted tokens. Okay. But we do use Gnosis for the multi-sig.
Got it.
All of our bids are done via Gnosis Safe. It's just for minting, we had a compound governance contract. But it's definitely, I think, the idea of building these tools where I think it's going to be way more useful, in spite of the fact that I'm the first person to tell you I think DeFi is awesome and I love it. But I actually think it's going to be way more useful for these like art DAO type things, or like collective ownership of some data in some weird way. than it is for DeFi. But the problem is those people don't want to do any programming. So like we have to get to the point that you can like they can do that on their own without needing to like understand very low level details about the assets they hold and stuff. And so like I think that's like the end game is like, okay, if Pleaser DAO didn't have a bunch of developers in it, I don't think it would have been much harder, right? But it's pretty easy because of that. And so I think who is the ideal consumer seems to be like people who want to have these collective ownership groups but are not technical, and like that's the next the next million users or whatever.
But wasn't that, I mean, that was what those original DAO projects were meant to do, right? They were supposed to create the UX of DAOs so that anyone could do it. Would you say that like we're back to square one? We have to rebuild on top of the new learnings, or can we use some of that stuff?
When you say old DAOs, you mean like Aragon?
Aragon.
Yeah. I honestly just think like the lightweightness of Gnosis is actually the key to it's just like less effort. Aragon just like you have to learn their whole vernacular and like be ingratiated into the cult in some ways to use it.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, fundamentally, it's just very hard problems. So it will just, take more time. So the safe is the kind of minimum form of governance. I mean, the simplest form is, well, you have a multisig, you have, I don't know, five key holders, and if 3 of them agree, well, then you can do something in a way that's at least starting point. And then the whole topic around how you describe a transaction, how you make sure that the transaction does what it says to do, well, that is simply a hard problem we are trying to tackle. And then kind of on top of that, you have the additional hard problem that we won't tackle and that others hopefully will tackle if, say, you have 1,000 people and somehow they together need to come to an agreement, and what is this process? But I think the really cool thing about Ethereum is the composability. So as Tarun mentioned, like already today, Gnosis Safe can be combined with, well, Snapshot, with Compound, actually also with Aragon. So Aragon DAOs could exist on layer 2, and kind of the decision that's being made there is then executed from a safe on layer 1. So there's almost infinite ways to combine things.
So I want to bring it back to the sort of point we made right at the beginning, this idea of Gnosis. Gnosis is focus on focus. So we've heard now kind of the Gnosis Safe, which is, I guess is it the most used, kind of like the largest success from your stack of products?
Yeah, probably. It currently holds almost 30 billion worth of assets.
Wild. It's done well. So from there, you've built, like, you're building sort of the DAO front. I don't know if, like, does the CowSwap still relate to that part of the stack as well?
Yeah, yes and no. So I would say the 2 big focuses for Gnosis are currently the wallet, Gnosis Safe, and Gnosis Protocol exchange mechanisms. There are, of course, connections. So ideally, if you have your funds in the Gnosis DAO, or specifically teams or also individuals, well, you want to trade, and we definitely want to, or we already have the tool to kind of a safe app. We have this concept of apps within the safe. You can start a Gnosis auction. So there is some overlap, but I would still say those 2 projects are somewhat separate. Yeah.
Cool. So I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing with us this update about Gnosis and about these kind of exciting new developments that have happened in the last 2 years.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Cool. Thanks again, Tarun.
Thanks.
And I want to say thank you to the podcast producer, Andre, to the podcast editor, Henrik, and to our listeners. Thanks for listening.